It's been a crazy couple of months for me, but it's time to get back to my roots and build a device that goes hand in hand with the purpose of my channel, building MIDI controllers. Today we are building this Bluetooth-enabled MIDI keyboard, which instead of piano keys has these mechanical keyboard switches. Let's start from the beginning. I wanted to build a battery-powered Bluetooth MIDI keyboard which can seamlessly connect to my DAW. Its purpose is to be a small travel-sized MIDI keyboard that has lots of functionality, which I can take with me to record some demo music. I needed to have a full octave of keys, as well as a way to change the octaves and transpose. I also wanted to have a set of potentiometers and encoders, and a few extra buttons which I can map to specific controls in Logic and in my plugins. I would also need an extra button to act as a shift switch, which would circle through a few shift positions so we can map and make use of the full MIDI CC list. Having all of these controls is handy, but it wouldn't be a complete MIDI keyboard without a pitch bend. And I have just the right component to make it happen. This is a rotary encoder with a spring inside, and it lets you rotate it halfway in each direction, after which the spring pulls it back to the middle position. It is perfect for a pitch bend. So once I figured out the layout and the functionality that I wanted, I went straight into EasyEDA and designed the PCB. And thanks to today's sponsor, jlcpcb, I had them made in no time. jlcpcb is a high-quality PCB manufacturer that makes the highest quality PCBs for the lowest prices. They are an essential tool for every maker. jlcpcb is a one-stop shop for all your project needs, offering easy, affordable and reliable services. They provide flexible PCBs, PCB assembly, SMT stencils, PCB layout services, 3D printing services, CNC machining, mechatronic parts and more. Ordering PCBs from jlcpcb is simple and intuitive. You simply need to drag your Gerber files onto their website and you can get an instant quote. For the PCBs you can choose various customizations, such as color, thickness and more. The best part is you can get 5 boards up to 10 by 10 centimeters for only $2. Get your PCBs made by jlcpcb today by signing up with the link in the description. The PCBs arrived and I went straight into my parts collection to get all the things I needed, and I'll walk you through the build process in case you wish to build your own. Now let's look at some of the issues. Note that in the beginning I said that we're building a Bluetooth-enabled MIDI keyboard and not a Bluetooth MIDI keyboard. Turns out the HC05 Bluetooth module can't natively send MIDI data, but instead it can send serial data that we later need to translate into MIDI data. I tinkered with it for the better part of a day, and the best I could get it to work is to translate scrambled MIDI messages. For example, when I sent a MIDI note message, I could translate it as a garbled CC message, so that wasn't going to work. I didn't want to leave out the Bluetooth functionality altogether, so I quickly came up with the idea to create a small complementary Android app, which would provide an expansion of the MIDI keyboard with things like drum pads, sliders, and even changing settings like MIDI channels. This meant that the MIDI keyboard wasn't going to be connected to the computer via Bluetooth, but instead it was going to have to be used with the USB cable, at least for now. Another thing was the battery-powered usage. Since the Arduino I picked was using 5V logic and the battery can only provide 3.7 volts, I was going to need an extra component, a boost converter, which I don't have. But it wouldn't matter either way because we currently can't use the MIDI keyboard as a Bluetooth device, so there's no point in powering it using a battery. So I completely removed it from the PCB until I find a different Bluetooth module and adapt it for this project. With that said, let's see what this device can do. The best way to demonstrate it is to create a beat. First we will connect the MIDI keyboard to the computer and then open the Android app. We need to connect the app to the HC05 Bluetooth module and let's use it to create a drum beat.